Foreign Affairs Ministers of the Southern Africa Development Community and the East African Community will meet in Harare, Zimbabwe tomorrow on the security situation in the east of the DRC. The meeting comes after the SADC made the decision to terminate the deployment of troops in eastern DRC. The withdrawal of the SADC troops will be done in phases. The meeting that was held in Tanzania by the two regional bodies agreed that the peace process must get off the ground. Angolan President and African Union Chairperson João Lourenço will lead the peace process tomorrow. The Zimbabwean and Kenya Foreign Affairs Ministers will have separate media briefings before the meeting and after the gathering for an update of the outcome of the discussions on the security situation in the eastern DRC.
We will continue to engage and persist with the situation. It's a follow-up meeting from the meeting we had in Dar es Salaam, where it was said that we need to meet again within 30 days to assess progress since that time, where we send the chiefs of the defense forces and also the two organs of the two communities, SADC and the East Africa one, to start and initiate the processes.
And we now speak to SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo. Kaya, that meeting is a critical one because part of what has to get off the ground is a joint effort and intervention for peace in the east of DRC between Rwanda and the DRC, or at least M23 more formally, and the DRC. Is the expectation that tomorrow's meeting puts together at least a skeleton of what that program will look like?
Well, certainly, Oliver, a very important meeting where obviously we've seen successive meetings between the SADC alongside their East African counterparts. And I suppose what is very key is that in all the meetings, there's always been an emphasis around the inclusion in terms of the non-state actors also meeting with the states, the military and also the non-military parties engaging so that we see long-lasting peace in the eastern parts of DRC. I think that has always been a very clear just goal in terms of what the leaders are trying to do, but also they will get a report in terms of the current situation in the eastern parts of DRC. At the recent engagement we had from South African President Cyril Ramaphosa when he was hosting the EU leaders, saying that they really just got the report during the virtual meeting as SADC leaders, really talking about a very precarious situation, but also emphasizing the issue, for example, Oliver, around the reopening of the Goma airport in terms of making sure that the humanitarian aid is distributed to a number of people in the DRC who have been displaced by the latest skirmishes, but also, most importantly, making a clarion call to the likes of the African Union and the entire international community to come to the rescue of the people of the eastern DRC.
Yeah. More importantly is the question around the factual basis of the M23 attack and insurgency in the Goma region and whether or not M23 is supported by Rwanda. At some point, the joint summits have to establish that as a matter of fact. And Paul Kagame, Rwandan president, is a part of these engagements, and so will his administration continue to be a part of it as a member of the East African community. He seems to have the support of Yoweri Museveni in Uganda as well, who is perhaps the longest standing head of state in the head of state meetings going forward following this engagement. What is expected to be discussed around Rwanda's role in this? Is that on the agenda? Do you know if it's a feature of the conversation tomorrow?
Well, Oliver, what is key about this particular issue is that, for example, we saw at the recent summit where there was an agreement between SADC and also the East African community to merge the Luanda process alongside the Nairobi process. So one of the overriding goals has always been making sure that they deal with the foster relations between the DRC and Rwanda. But for the longest time, Rwanda has always been rejecting allegations that they are supporting M23, but the United Nations and many other international organizations, they seem to have substantial evidence to prove to that effect that in fact Rwanda is supporting M23. But also what has always been a statement from Kigali is that for them it's about a defensive measure. But from the Congolese authorities, at least they say, their sovereignty, their territorial integrity in this regard has been violated by the presence of RDF. So it's going to be a very main issue where the ministers will have an opportunity to look at the modalities Another very key element in this regard, Oliver, will have to be around the withdrawal of semi-DRC troops in terms of these phases, how they're going to make sure that it's run in a delicate but also very smooth process, especially given the very unstable and volatile situation that still prevails in the eastern parts of the DRC, but also the issue about the humanitarian aid. It's another very key issue in this regard because a number of civilians have been displaced, and M23 continues to really just make inroads in so many parts of the eastern parts of Congo.
The withdrawal of the semi-DRC mission in the DRC, particularly alongside the drawback of the MONUSCO mission, which its drawback was initiated several years ago, it begs the question, is DRC being left vulnerable to the onslaught and insurgency of M23? Is there a conversation to be had by the joint summit heads of foreign ministers around what the interim measure looks like for stability in the east of DRC?
Well, definitely. I think the ministers will have an opportunity to look at what's going to be done in terms of the vacuum now that will be there, where MONUSCO will be there by itself in this particular instance. But what is also very key in this regard, when you go back to the previous meeting, in the virtual meeting in Zimbabwe chaired by SADC chairperson and Zimbabwean President Mnangagwa, I think there was a very reaffirmation that the SADC countries are still committed to this mutual defense pact, where they say it's a collective responsibility. If a member state is facing an instability, there must be an intervention from the regional body. So I suppose in this regard, they will have an opportunity to look at ways whether perhaps what can be done in this regard in terms of making sure that DRC is not left vulnerable, Oliver, especially because these particular conflicts really, if it escalates, it won't just affect Congo, it's going to affect so many countries in the Great Lakes really are so vulnerable because it's a fairly unstable region. And if one country is caught up in the conflicts, the displacement of the civilians and the far-reaching implications can just be quite really just concerning.
Yeah. Khayelihle Khumalo, thank you so much for that update. Really do appreciate it.